Hello and welcome. So today I've got a few different items here that I'm going to be using for my next desktop build. As much as I love living the laptop life, I think there's nothing that quite compares to a desktop gaming experience. And of course, a desktop for video editing, content creation is far superior than any laptop you're going to be able to get on the market. Of course, this is a stationary system, so the main reason for building this is, of course, we've got the latest Zen 5 CPUs. Last year, I was running the Zen 4 CPUs. That was a 7950X with 16 cores. This time, I've gone with the 9900X. I believe it's a little bit more feasible in terms of the price point. And considering my use cases for what I'll be doing with this desktop, I don't really believe that I need anything more than that. Of course, I'm going to keep my eyes peeled for the 9950X3D. I know the 9800X3D was just introduced, but I'm going to wait and see what happens with the 3D processors with Vcache in 2025 with the new 9950X, the 16-core 32-thread CPUs. For this particular build, so from the right-hand side, we've got here a Frozen Prism 240 Black. The heart of the operation here, we've selected the MSI Carbon X870E. As I've said here, I've selected the 12-core 9900X. As for RAM, I've gone with just some very basic until the price on DDR5 8000 kits, which are the recommended kits by AMD for the Zen 5 series, come down in price. This is just a standard crucial DDR5 Pro kit at 32 gigabytes, 2x16 modules. And as for SSD, I've gone with a single. This is SK Hynix Platinum P41. So this GPU here was something I picked up off of the used market, off of Facebook Marketplace, for roughly 200 Canadian dollars, 230 Canadian dollars. I'm going to be doing a dedicated review on the ARC A750. I still haven't given up hope with Intel. We hope that they bring more competition back to the GPU space and give NVIDIA and AMD a run for their money. And I've gone here with a Sama XP 1000 watt power supply. This has a 12 volt HP rail for the NVIDIA GPUs such as the 4080 and 4090. As for a case, I've gone with something very basic. I selected the Fractal Design Pop Air case. Unfortunately, I don't have quite enough space on my desk to be able to showcase that case here. So this is the setup here. Let's get started. I'll show a few tidbits here. Get right into the build. Now let's talk about the choice of motherboard for this particular build. I've got here the X870E. X870E is the top of the line chipset for AMD's AM5 based Zen 5 CPUs. The 9900X will go slotted in here. We've got 4 memory slots for potentially up to 128 gigs at some point in the future, particularly if you're going to be running large language models locally on your desktop, and that is one of my plans to do so. Additionally, we've got a Lightning Speed here, or a Lightning Gen 5 M.2 slot. We've got 1 plus 3 under here, so let me remove these. You just press a latch and you're able to remove these covers, and these guys have pre-applied thermal pads to draw the heat away from those Gen 5 SSDs, which run especially hot. Similarly here, we can press these 2 latches on the side and we can remove this pad here and cover, which also has pre-applied thermal pads for drying away the heat from 3 additional M.2 slots for a total of 4 M.2 slots on the Carbon 870E. 2 2280 slots and 1 22 by 110 millimeter slot. It's nice to see that because a lot of the enterprise drives that can be had sometimes at a cheap discount on eBay or other used marketplaces often come in 110 millimeter varieties. The other nicety about this board is that we've got 2 PCIe Gen 5 X16 slots for GPUs that I'd be using for encoding, streaming, and content creation and whatnot. So dedicated gaming GPU plus a content creation, streaming, and other work GPU. Another big draw for using this particular board was the port selection here. So this was one of the only boards that I saw that offered 4 USB Type-C ports. These are 3.2 Gen 2 at 10 gigabits per second, and these 2 ports here are USB 4 40 gigabits per second ports, akin to what you would get with Thunderbolt 4 bandwidth. In addition to these USB-C ports, all of these ports here are red, meaning they're all USB 3.2 Gen 2 ports. That's counted a total of 6 plus 3, 9 USB 3.2 Gen 2 ports, all running at 10 gigabits per second. Great for connecting all your peripherals, cameras, capture equipment, capture cards, as well as external hard drives and whatnot for running your game library. And we've got here dual NIC. This is a 2.5 gig plus a 5 gig Ethernet on board. Very lovely to see this kind of offering for those of you who have high-speed Ethernet, or if you're running a local switch to your local NAS, you're going to be able to get some fantastic speeds over this 5 gig network connection. We've got connectors here for a Wi-Fi 7 antenna, so this is a 2x2 And we've got some microphone and headphone jacks. And nice to see here, this just seems to be going the way of the dodo bird. This is the optical out connector. Love to see this for high fidelity optical audio out. And of course, we've got 3 buttons here for recovery. One of them is for flash, one of them is for CMOS clear, and then you also have another smart button. And it is a hefty board as well. It's quite heavy, and as I would expect, there's lots of metal on this thing. It's not a light board, so you want to make sure you have a very steady and sturdy case that can actually handle this much weight. Particularly when you have the GPUs mounted here, it's going to be drawing a lot of weight down from the actual mounting plates. Now let's take a look at the cooler of choice here. As I mentioned earlier, this is a Thermalright. For all intents and purposes, a good 240 that's nearly silent, that doesn't break the bank. As I mentioned, $50 US for this here. There are a RGB model available both in black and white. Those I believe are only $5 or $10 difference versus this one. So if RGB is your thing, you can certainly opt for that. So let's open this up and see what we've got inside. All right, very nice. So we've got some instruction manual here about frozen prism. Thermalright also provides all the accessories you need for mounting this on a LGA socket from Intel or AMD's AM4, or in this case of the 9000 series, the AM5 sockets. And also, of course, included is some thermal paste for that CPU. Not quite sure what variety, but should get the job done. And if you look here at the CPU mounting hardware, so this one has a nice thick copper plate, some really nice flexible and thick beefy tubing for supplying that coolant, and some fan headers and RGB headers, at least for the CPU mount. And of course, we've got some Thermalright blanding here on the radiator itself. It's a 240mm rad with some extra fans and some fan cables here to also connect your system headers. 2x120 fans here get the job done for cooling. And next we'll talk about the CPU here. So the one I've selected here, as I mentioned just in the introduction of this video, is the Zen 5 9900X. This is a 12-core, 24-thread CPU. This one here, because it's a 9900X, that means there is some overhead or some room for overclocking and tuning this CPU. The X indicates that it is unlocked and you can actually tweak multiple parameters of this CPU to tune it to your liking. If you like to undervolt or overclock, this is going to be the CPU to get. Be sure to buy something that ends in an X, and you'll be able to do that with the Zen 5 generation. Now, the big claim to fame for Zen 5, I believe, is the fact that one, it's going to run much cooler, it draws less power, and it can run in eco mode at 65 watts, giving you nearly the same match in performance. At least that's what the claims are, versus Zen 4, which was using double the power at 125 watts. And we'll do just a quick unboxing here and look at these actual components. So this is the Sama 1000 watt 80 plus platinum power supply. I picked this up at about $130. Some nice packaging foam. And we have here an instructional booklet, Sama 80 plus platinum. These are made in Japan, or rather a Japanese company, but their stuff is manufactured in China. So here is the fully modular ATX 80 plus platinum certified power supply. Love this packaging here, beautiful case. I'll set this aside. And here we have the actual power supply. Let's put it right side up so we can talk about it for just a moment. So we can see here some IDE and SATA connectors, 2 mainboard connectors here. This is the main and plus the supplementary, a 12 volt HP rail for all of those NVIDIA 4080 and 4090 GPUs that required that extra juice. PCI Express power, a lot more PCI Express connectors, the CPU supplementary power, and the IDE and SATA ports. It's a nice design here. It's a beautiful build actually. Typical ATX power supply. I'm assuming that they're using Japanese capacitors and other electrical components inside, which are highly rated and usually last quite a long time. We have here a bag. I assume this has all of the cabling and accessories that are required for plugging in and connecting all your components. Yes, indeed. We have a nice and beefy ATX cable here. And we have lots of other cables and accessories. Also included is some tie straps. Very nice to see that they've included this. It really helps to do all of your cable management and keep your build looking neat. Also, there are some screws, ATX mounting screws included, mounting in your favorite case. Some ATX screws are included with this power supply. A nice and beefy ATX power cable. And of course, lots of bundled accessory cables for any type of connector that you would probably need with this power supply. All right, now let's have a quick look at the RAM that I'll be using for this particular build. These are crucial DDR5 modules, desktop RAM. 2 by 16 gigabytes I'll be using for a total of 32 gigabytes for this particular build. These are 6000 megahertz speed. Of course, from AMD this year, the official recommendation for Zen 5, all of the 9000 series CPUs, is DDR5 8000. I guess that's a doubling of the Infinity Fabric speeds this generation, which means we'll get a lot faster throughput for copy tasks and memory intensive tasks, including that iGPU that's on board the Zen 5 CPU. So that'll be very interesting to take a look at. I'll be waiting a little bit here because the DDR5 8000 modules and kits are hard to come by, one, especially in Canada, and number two, they're very, very pricey right now. So I believe in a few months, when they've come down in price and when the 9950X 3D variant has been released, tested, and declared a winner in terms of performance and all those aspects, then perhaps we'll be looking at upgrading to a 64 gigs or even perhaps 128 gigabytes of DDR5 8000 RAMs for that next, or for this build. All right, next we'll look here at the SSD of choice here for this particular build. I've used this SSD drive for my Zephyrus G16 to show how you upgrade an SSD. I'll be using the same SSD drive here for this particular desktop build. But for now, let's talk about just some basic specs and a quick overview of why this particular drive. For one thing, these drives have definitely come down in a price a lot. And although this board supports, the motherboard that I've chosen for this particular build, although it supports PCIe Gen 5 SSDs, I still believe PCIe Gen 4 to be the best value. For one, you're going to basically pay half the price of a 2 terabyte equivalent drive, if not more, or if not less, excuse me, for a Gen 4 than a Gen 5 drive. Despite the doubling of the speed, you won't notice on a day-to-day any real difference in terms of usage unless you're doing very, very heavy file copy or very heavy read-write operations to disks, such as archiving, backup, data recovery, or perhaps content creation or data migration. The P41 NVMe really tops out at the charts and basically gives you top-of-the-line performance for Gen 4 speeds, topping out at 7000 megabytes per second read and write. I don't think you could ask for really much more, and this is a very inexpensive drive. I've seen this on sale. Find a link in the description below. Help to buy this drive through our Amazon affiliate link to help this channel grow. So here it is in some sort of state of assembly here. I'll just say a few things about this particular case. This is the Fractal Design Pop Air. I've decided to reuse this case for now. Of course, in the near future, I'll be swapping probably to a different Fractal Design case. I really like their designs. They seem to fit well. They're quite easy to work with. Cable management isn't quite as difficult as some of the other cases. But just to give you an overview here, so we've got our MSI Carbon X870E board in there. It's a full-size ATX board. It's a little bit of a tight fit, as you can see here, that this isn't a full-size tower case here, but it fits, decently enough. We've got some room here up at the top for routing those CPU power cables, and of course also those connectors here for the RGB, the system fans, etc. We've got the AIO here. The thermal right is mounted over to the front of the grill, so you get this push-pull configuration with these case fans and with the AIO itself, allowing sufficient cooling. And this is hooked up here over our AM4 socket kit that came included with the thermal right at only $50 US. It's fantastic value in terms of an AIO for cooling. We'll have to test it out though, how the noise levels are with it at full blast and how far we can potentially overclock our 9900X. Stay tuned for that conversation and that video to come very soon. So that's it here. Not really a lot of RGB going on. So just a few things here I'd like to highlight when building, in this case with the Carbon X870E. This here, the USB connectors, if you can kind of see if I push these PCIe cables out of the way. This here is the front panel USB connector. It was quite difficult to hook up because it's at the side of the case, so this panel here is not removable. Initially I tried to mount this radiator here at the top of this case here. It does support top mounting and also front mounting. Front mounting you can do, I believe, 280 millimeters max, and at the top you can also do 280 millimeters. This one here is a 240 millimeter. Mounting this at the top proved a challenge because this housing here on the motherboard, which is used for the VRM cooling and other capacitors, and also the front or the rear panel connectors, made it quite difficult to actually get this to fit. It did fit, but it was just so tight that I didn't feel comfortable with this. I instead decided to mount this to the front. We've also got our SSD drives in there. It's kind of hard to access now. I can't remove this panel without having to remove this GPU first, so I guess that's a downside of having this metallic cover. There is the Sama power supply, proved to be absolutely fantastic with the 1000 watts, and I'll just swap over here to the front and show you quickly. And if we look at the front of this case here, it's a pretty decent looking case. Of course, I've got all the paneling off here, so we'll put that paneling on in a moment and we'll show you how this looks. But I wanted to talk about here, these are pretty fantastic Arctic case fans, and they are RGB. I have not connected the RGB as of yet. Down here there is space here for mounting additional hard drives. Of course, this is one of the few cases, and that's the reason I got it, that you can actually still mount a optical drive. So if you're looking for a Blu-ray or a DVD burner drive for long-term archival of data, you still have that option here, whereas most PC cases now are totally omitting these 5¼ inch drives altogether. Alright, so here we can see here the back side of the motherboard and the right side of the case, so the back paneling here. The wiring is a bit of a mess here. There wasn't sufficient routing, routing opportunities here to keep all of these cables. Lots of room here, as you can see, for these very deep 5¼ inch optical drive. So the 80-watt Platinum Plus here, the Sama XP power supply fit in just beautifully. All of the cables were modular. The connectors turned out to be fantastic. If you have suggestions on how to cable manage this better, do leave me a note in the comments below. This is just a mess. It's absolutely disastrous. And just to highlight here the top panel of this Pop Air case, we've got here the power connector, or the power switch, excuse me, a reset button, a headphone jack, a microphone jack, and of course 2 USB 3.0s, and we have a USB Type-C port here, and we've got sufficient mounting options here for a 240mm rad. There also comes with a dust cover. I believe I've lost or misplaced that somewhere, so that's going to be the state of affairs for now. Plenty of mounting options for 240, 280, or even a 120mm rad. And just a brief look at the back panel here. So we've got our power supply connector. This is the typical ATX cable. We've got our A750 ARC GPU slotted in there. This one comes with typical 1 HDMI and 1 HDMI here and 3 DisplayPort connectors. I believe these are DisplayPort still 1.4. They're not 2.1 as you see on some of the latest AMD GPUs. We'll have to kind of take a look and see what the specs are. And then of course that X870E carbon motherboard with all of its gorgeous and glorious connections. We've got optical out, and in the future we'll also be covering here, this is going to be a whole unholy trifecta. We'll have the ARC GPU, we'll also have an NVIDIA GPU, and we'll have an AMD CPU. So I'm going to be talking about what that trifecta looks like in day-to-day operation for gaming, for encoding, for streaming, for content creation, and we'll give you our thoughts on how that kind of experience. I think it's going to be totally fine. Alright, so we've got the tempered glass panel on the side here. The other back panel is on. We've got the case assembled back together. That said, because I've got 2 GPUs in here, I am a little concerned about the airflow here. Is there enough room for the A750 to draw enough air in this case? Keep in mind, on the back of the case here, there's only room for 1 fan here, and I believe the largest fan that can fit in there is already mounted to the back of the case here. That said, we may need to add additional 2 fans, perhaps 280mm or whatever the largest can support with that motherboard in there, to get some additional cooling capacity in here, or perhaps we'll have to change the case altogether once we get the 4070, that 9900X, and the RK750 really powered up and running all at their maximum potential. Keep subscribe to this channel and follow for future coming videos, which we're going to talk about undervolting on the 99X, overclocking as well, overclocking on the 4070 and undervolting, and of course undervolting and overclocking on the A750. It's been nearly 2 years since the A750 and the Intel GPUs were released. There's going to be a big follow-up video with some modern, latest games to say, hey, what does the performance look like 2 years in from Intel on their A750 GPU in some of the most modern and demanding games. So a good amount of RGB. I guess we have all of the highlights here. I would love to get maybe some RGB RAM. I think that would be very nice. Perhaps when we get all 4 channels populated in there, or all 4 RAM slots, excuse me. We've got the MSI Dragon logo, the Carbon, Intel Arc Highlight, and Thermalright with the CPU on board there. It's going through the post now. I think that's about sufficient for the RGB I'd like to see currently. Perhaps we'll need to swap these out for matching fans, get ourselves an RGB header, and really live the good life here. And let's do our initial boot here and get ourselves into the BIOS. So here we are. We can see here that it's a very nicely laid out BIOS here. MSI is one of the main manufacturers here of PC motherboards and other components, so it has a very nice and comprehensive. We can see here our motherboard, our CPU is being shown as a 9900X, 4.4 GHz base speed, and some CPU temps. We also see our 32 GB of crucial RAM is being recognized, 2x16 modules here of DDR5, and we can see here our fan speeds at the bottom of there, so we can see at a glance how our system system is doing. There's also lots of other switches and toggle in here. Looks like there could be a dedicated video made on the X87's BIOS itself, and of course all of the performance tuning that will go into any of the 9000 series CPUs for that matter. And we got some advanced overclocking and other functions here that you can go into. We'll take a look at advanced just momentarily. Lots and lots of configuration options here. This is one of the I guess niceties of buying a much higher end board such as the X870E. This is of course a $700 Canadian motherboard, so that means you're going to have all the stuff at your disposal for tweaking, overclocking, and tuning to your heart's content. We can also select precision overdrive here. I've selected auto. It is the option that's selected or asked of you when you initially first boot. So this is just a subsequent boot. I wasn't able to capture the initial boot. Nonetheless though, auto PBO right now. I will be doing a dedicated video later on where we look at the overclocking, how we check the Infinity Fabric, and how we can get the most out of this 9900X unlocked CPU from AMD's Zen 5 9000 series. Also got lots of options here for DDR overclocking. We can play with the different modes here. I do not have Expo certified RAM currently in this machine. Just a basic set of DDR 6000 speed rated overclocking, but by default it runs as 5600 mega transfers per second, as you can see over on the right here. Lots of other options here to look at for undervolting and of course overclocking this CPU as well. There's lots of options we can take a look at here. Mostly what we'll be focusing on is how we can get this to run nice and quiet. So one thing we'll try here is certainly that eco mode, which pins these CPUs down to about 65 watts, so you get kind of a mobile like experience on your desktop if you want to run a light and a quiet system. We'll certainly explore that in a future video when we do undervolting and overclocking and performance tuning. It's a whole lot of words there to say on these CPUs from AMD for Zen 5. And we'll also look at the opposite end, so 65 watts, a mobile-like experience where everything's under control, you kind of keep power levels in check, and all things turned all the way up, pedal to the metal, how far we can overclock this thing and how stable it can be. I wonder if we can get a 5 gigahertz stable overclock on this CPU for it to run at all times. It may consume quite a lot of power, so that's one of the drawbacks. I think there should be a balance between the power draw and what you're seeing from the CPU's output as well. So 4.4 gigahertz seems a little bit lower than the Zen 4 generation, but then again, those CPUs ran very hot. These by comparison seem to be toned down a little bit, so perhaps AMD's learned their lesson and not gone into the Intel camp where they just keep boosting the power clocks or the clocks every generation at the cost of heat and of course thermals. That said, we can adjust the different modes here for the M2 slots. There's 4 M2 slots on this board here. We can adjust whether they're going to run a Gen 5 or Gen 1 speeds. It's very nice to see actually that this is configurable through the motherboard. I wonder if it'll auto detect, because I've got my drive here populated into the 3rd or 4th slot and it doesn't seem to detect any speed. Assume that auto is going to be the way to go here. So unless you really know what you're doing, you shouldn't be messing around in here, but nice to see that MSI has really provided us, the power users, lots and lots of options for tweaking here, and nice to see that our SSD is recognized as well. And finally, let's get booted up to our operating system here and get back to the desktop. With that, we'll close out this video. So there's a nice MPG performance gaming from MSI's logo for this X870E motherboard, and we're getting our Windows 11 loaded here. Once we'll get to our desktop, we can see that our system is ready to go and ready for future follow-up videos on performance, tuning, and lots of other contents to come on this new build for my gaming, streaming, and of course content creation setup and all-around power workstation PC. That said, I hope you enjoyed this video. It's a little bit of a different format than perhaps what you're used to. I tried to do it in my own style a little bit. We'll be following up, as I mentioned, with lots of content, so please click that like button and do get subscribed for lots more content to come, and share this across your social media channels to help grow this channel. Thanks very much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.